I'm here for one purpose today, and that is to disrupt the language of racism. In my view, racism is the poison in the well we drink from every day. Racism is that sticky substance on the bottom of our shoes that we feel as we walk through the day. It's a dark cloud behind us. It's a foul smell in the distance. And it is the challenge of our lifetime. Now, most of us don't want to be racists, although studies and surveys suggest that half of us, at least, have some racist thoughts, exhibit some racist behavior. So look at the person next to you. Go ahead, really, look at the person next to you, seriously. Okay, one of the two of you have some work to do on this. That's a little bit of an uncomfortable feeling, isn't it? Right? So, why does racism persist? In many ways, it's like this image I'm showing you. Look at this carefully. It pulls you in. You're almost out of control to get out of it. And racism is very much like that, because the language of racism has us in its grasp. For me personally, I find my approach to racism insufficient. So I'm taking the choice of trying a different approach. We all know that racism is stitched into the fabric of everything we're involved in, and it's stitched there by the language that we use. Now, we have made progress. Over the years, we have changed laws and changed minds, and even changed the way we speak about racism. But we've missed a few important components, and that is built into the language of racism. Because no system can exist without the language to describe it and the language to support it. Because words are power. As a lifelong sales and marketing aficionado, I certainly appreciate the power of words. As an example, can you imagine how much money the fast food industry has made in the few years since they started asking people one simple question? All right, you want fries with that? Do you have any idea how much money that's generated from one simple question? Most of you use plastic when you shop. You use a credit card. It wasn't always like that. The retail business changed our shopping behaviors and our shopping patterns dramatically and quickly by learning to ask one simple question. Will that be cash or credit? So in the same way, we can affect racism in how we use language. And in many ways, we have changed the language of racism in America. We no longer refer to people as octoroons or quadroons or half-breeds. We no longer call people Negro or colored. But we have missed some very important words that support the system of racism that we have yet to address. One in particular, most of us find to be a harmless descriptor. That is the word white. Many of us find this as a harmless way to describe people. Let me suggest something different to you. First of all, in my view, white is not an ethnicity. There were no white people before slavery and racism became institutionalized and well accepted in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, many people will suggest to you that white means of Northern European heritage. Well, I find that to be nonsense, because people in Northern Europe never called themselves white. They called themselves by the country they came from, by the language they spoke, by the king they swore allegiance to, the dialect they spoke. White is one of the definitions of racism. It was created as a category to define who the masters are, All privilege goes to those white, nothing goes to everybody else. But we have not changed this term. We continue to use this term today. And although many of us assume it to be a harmless descriptor, it carries its old baggage with it. So I'm making a simple choice today. Don't call me white anymore. I don't want you to call me white. Partly for the reason I just told you, because it is one of the words that holds up the pillars of racism, and partly because it really doesn't make any sense at all. If you're going to describe me by my ethnicity, I am not white. I am a Norwegian German with a dash of Hungarian. My father was born in Norway. His people come from a long line of farmers who eked a living out of the mountain valleys in a very short growing season. There's some fabulous stories about how they lived and what they did and the adventures they had. My mother's a German immigrant. Many of her family were military officers in the Prussian army and then before that. Many were teachers, musicians. One of her ancestors was a contemporary of Bach who used to hang out at Bach's house. Imagine that. Our family is full of amazing stories on this side of the family. One of my German ancestors was Jewish. And if I had the records, I could probably trace his family back to North Africa, because his ancestors came to Germany through France in the 1500s, which meant they probably fled Spain in the 1400s, which meant they probably came from Morocco 100 or 200 years earlier. We all have these fantastic stories in our family. But when you use the term white to describe me, you rob me of all of these stories of my family. You wipe away and whitewash away all of the ethnic heritage and cultural heritage that is me. And I object to that. There's another reason I don't want you to call me white, because calling people white and not white makes no sense at all. And I know it makes no sense at all because if you test the concept on children, you'll find it to be bogus. So here's some happy kids jumping around. Test a concept on a kid. Do kids understand what a sphere is? Easy concept to get. Tell a kid about a cube. They certainly get that concept easily. Hot, cold, big, little, these are easy concepts for a child to grasp. But a person being white or not white, it makes no sense to kids. And I'll give you an example of how I know it makes no sense to kids. In the summer of 1976, between my junior and senior years in high school, I worked as a security guard working the night shift on a construction site on 117th Street in Spanish Harlem in New York City. Now, it's called Spanish Harlem not because Spanish people live there, but because a lot of Spanish speakers live there. And most at that time were from Puerto Rico, La Isla Linda. And New York was like that in those days. There were lots of ethnic neighborhoods, ethnic enclaves all over the city. Right next to Spanish Harlem was Italian Harlem, a small area where many people of Italian descent lived and many still spoke Italian. But my job was to make sure that everything that was installed during the day and all the supplies did not disappear overnight. So I watched this building overnight. Now, 117th Street was a very active block. A lot of people lived there. And in 1976, hardly anyone had air conditioning. On this block, probably no one did. Summers were hot in New York. So the only way to get relief would be to stay outside and have fans blowing the hot air out of your apartment until it was cool enough to sleep. That might be midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. So every night was a block party. It was a lot of fun. People would come out and sit in their lawn chairs, play ball. It was a good time. Now, it took me a few days to be accepted by the community because hardly any outsiders ever came onto 117th Street, ever. But once I was accepted, even the little kids wanted to come out and play. So I had a good time playing stickball and stoop ball that summer. It was a good time. But one little guy in particular came up to me and said, "What are you?" And I said, "I'm the security guard." "What do you mean, what am I?" He said, "No, what are you? Because you're not Puerto Rican and you're not white. What are you?" You see, the little kids weren't allowed off the block. They could go up to one corner or down to the other, but they couldn't leave the block, so their family could keep an eye on them. So for this little guy, probably the only people he had ever seen that were light-skinned and fair-haired were Puerto Rican. And the only people he had probably ever seen who identified as white were the Italians in Italian Harlem 2 blocks over, and not very many of them apparently were fair-skinned and light-haired. You see, to him, I was not white. So that proves it just doesn't make any sense. I also know that calling someone white or not white doesn't make any sense from my own experience as a kid, because it made no sense to me. When I was a small child, I lived among the pines and the prairies in northern Wisconsin and ran loose like a little banshee. It was a lot of fun. When I was about 8, we moved to New York City, mostly to be close to my grandparents, who lived on 140th Street and Broadway, an area which many people called German Harlem, because so many Germans lived there after the end of the Second World War, and it was 2 blocks from where people considered Harlem to officially start. But I used to ride the subway from our home in Brooklyn up to see my grandparents by myself, starting when I was 10 or 11. And that was not unusual. Little kids traveled by themselves a lot, and it was never a problem. For me, it was a great adventure. I loved to people watch, and I could try and imagine the stories of these people's lives as they walked by, and who they were, and where they came from, and where they worked, and what they did. It was a lot of fun. And then when I'd get to 137th Street, my grandmother's stop, I could come upstairs and smell the amazing smells coming from the Dominican bodega and listening to the amazing sounds coming from the Soul Record Shop. It was certainly an adventure. But I remember one day changing trains at 42nd Street and getting on the number 1 to go uptown, when I thought I would try and find out who these black people were that I was hearing so much about. See, I heard about black power and black being beautiful, but I had no reference as to what that might relate to. Because in my mind, I had no idea that there were black people. It made no sense to me as a child. Now, I certainly knew who Negroes and colored people were. I was a baseball fan. I loved watching Willie Mays play on TV. And I loved watching Bob Gibson play on TV. What an amazing pitcher. But I also liked to read. And I knew that Negroes had been the pharaohs of Egypt, and that the Songhai and Mali and Ghana dynasties must have been amazing places to visit. So I was ignorant, I wasn't stupid. So there I was on the number 1 train looking around for black people. And I thought, well, that lady's not black, she's kind of beige, and that guy's not black, he's brown. I thought, well, there's a fellow who's pretty dark, but he's maybe more blue than black. I mean, it just made no sense to me whatsoever. So I wonder what would have happened to race relations and the racist climate in our country if instead of calling people white people and black people, we had called people beige people and brown people. How would that have affected the language of racism? Where we have white and black, there's a separation. We have opposites. I don't know. I suggest that to you. But I was completely stumped, so I went home and asked my mom about it, and she tried to explain it to me. These weren't her exact words, but here's basically what I understood. She said, you know, those terms, Negro and Colored, reminded a lot of people of bad times, when a lot of bad things happened to a lot of bad people, and when non-white people had no rights and no protection. She said it was kind of a lot like it was when I grew up in Germany. It was a scary time. So people thought there should be another way to describe oneself that evoked pride and confidence and suggested a better future. And I thought to myself, well, I guess that makes sense, because I never really liked being called a kraut or a kike by some of the kids in the schoolyard, so I guess that makes sense to me. So now I understand. However, you see, we never changed the other side of the equation. We stopped calling people Negro and Colored, but we continued to call people on the other side of the equation white. Now, you can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself, and I'm fine with that. And some of you may be stewing right now and infuriated that I should suggest that, at least for myself, I don't want to be called white anymore, because you may have some pride in what you perceive your white heritage to be. Well, I'd ask you for a moment to think about what it is you're actually proud of, because I doubt very much that too many of you are proud that at one time I could have sat in the front of the bus and anyone not white couldn't, that at one time I could not have been captured and sold into slavery legally, and not white people could be. I'm sure there are few of you that are proud of that. I am, however, quite sure that we're all proud of our ethnic heritage. And some of you may have ancestors that were cowboys and rode the range for months at a time and lived out of their saddlebags and had some amazing adventures and amazing stories. Some of you may have had ancestors who built a dairy business with 3 cows and a horse and a carriage and turned it into something. I know my kids have ancestors who started on the East Coast of America from Welsh and English heritage, who came across the Cumberland Gap, settled in Kentucky, and later came here to central Missouri and made a life for themselves, bringing really only all they could carry or all they could put on their horse. Or some of you may have ancestors in the old country who did great things you're proud of. Perhaps one of your ancestors was an English suffragette. I don't know. But all of our families have these amazing stories and amazing histories and lots to be proud of. Just like I'm very proud of my Viking ancestors and their travel gusto and their ability to build ships and their seamanship. Although I got to tell you, I'm pretty creeped out at how good they were at pillage and plunder and rape and enslavement. That's pretty creepy. Now, my distant ancestors through my Hungarian blood were probably part of Genghis Khan's armies. And these guys were amazing horsemen. What a heritage to think that your ancestors rode across the plains with next to nothing and their favorite ponies and were able to do amazing things. However, the way they treated the people they conquered is something I choose not to be proud of at all. So you can make the choice about what you're proud of and what you're not proud of, and you can find the family stories in your heritage to be proud of. And I choose to do that without calling myself white, because I don't want to bring up the old language of racism and remind that to people. But I do want to celebrate the heritage and the rich ethnic background that we all have and the wonderful stories that our families all share. So you can call me what you want. You can call me the bald guy with the crooked nose and the bad teeth. You can call me an idiot. You can call me late for dinner. Just please, don't call me white. Thank you.